Hello, my name is Peyton Peeler, and this is the first lecture of the lecture series on Lacanian psychoanalysis. And today we're going to be doing an overview, a little lesson about the origins and the prerequisite information for the rest of the lecture videos. So, psychoanalysis, the introduction. And the first thing we're going to look at is psychoanalysis, the word. Psychoanalysis. Psycho, as in concerning the psyche, which is sometimes represented by the psi symbol, which is like this. And it is the sort of self, the soul, perhaps. In fact, psyche is commonly referred to as the Greek word for soul. And there is also the analysis, which is looking at things. That can be looking at things in a small and zooming out for the larger part of analysis and understanding the whole within that. So when we think of going to the therapist or going to get some help mentally, we usually think we need an individual who's specialized for that, right? But I mean, with just the word by itself, psychoanalysis, I mean, I guess I would say everybody has a psyche, right? And anybody, if they know how to, can analyze something. So, do you really need a therapist or an analyst, as we call it, to perform psychoanalysis? Some people would disagree, but most of the revolutionary people who started psychoanalysis did analyze themselves at first. However, if you are in need of mental help, I would very much recommend going to a specialized individual for that. But we're just going to be talking about the theory today. So, all right. Psychoanalysis. What even is the psyche? We're not really sure, but psychoanalysis isn't really concerned with the psyche as much as it's concerned with what's in it. There's the idea that there is nothing completely as it seems. What is the hidden jewel within a person, which is considered the soul? It's the inside of yourself. And so psychoanalysis isn't so concerned about the definition of the psyche. Another word for the psyche is the unconscious. And guys, please spell check here. I'm only 17 and I still cannot spell correctly words. So the unconscious or the psyche is the unknown known about yourself. What an oxymoron. So the unknown known. There are things that you know, right? There are things that you don't know that you don't know. And there are things that you don't know. But what if there were things that you don't know that you know? And a good analogy or a synonym for this is ideology. So the unconscious is pretty much like ideology. And we typically think of ideology as something that you were born into, like your religion or a political ideology. And that kind of frames it. We typically think of it as something we can just deconstruct, something we can wipe away to get a clean slate. And unfortunately, it seems like the unconscious in this ideology isn't. It's something that we're kind of stuck with to a certain point. And we just have to be able to have a critical lens on it. Sigmund Freud was the inventor of psychoanalysis. And he was very much interested in this understanding the insides of something, the hidden meaning, or perhaps, if you do know Plato, is sort of a galma, the hidden inside which makes something valuable or perceived as valuable. And there are two big works we're going to talk about today that are important for the rest of this lecture series, and that is the interpretation of dreams and slips and jokes. So the interpretation of dreams, we are applying basically the same logic here, that there is something more to your dreams as there's something more to what you're saying or to yourself just in general. So he would take a look at your dreams and see what is the meaning behind this dream. Why are you having this dream? We aren't quite sure, but we're going to take a pretty good guess. And he uses mechanisms to understand this and to get those answers for people. So an example of an interpretation of dreams would be you're getting attacked by zombies in your dream. And for some odd reason, they're all saying, take your break, go take your break. So that's our example. I'll explain the concepts in just a second for understanding why. But the second one is slips and jokes. So it isn't just your dreams, there's something more to, but it's also the normal words that come out of your mouth, the accidents. So there's that births the idea of a meaningful accident. Something happened for a purpose. You know, you've heard people say, oh, everything happens for a reason. This is kind of what that means. So, slips and jokes. For example, if you are in class and your teacher asks you to go turn your paper in or to write your name on your paper, you might say, yes, teacher, or you might accidentally say, yes, mom. Why would you call your teacher your mom? That doesn't make any sense. We'll explain why in just a second. But that's an example of a slip. And there is also, he gets into jokes. Whenever someone tells a joke, sometimes you might laugh or you might not laugh, but if you really read the joke a couple times, you understand the bias behind it, why it's being made. You kind of get to see into the mind of the writer of the joke, per se. And that is what he deals with in the same way as slips, finding the hidden meaning. An example of that would be, let's use the slip example. That's replacing teacher with mom. And here you're making a connection between your teacher and your mom. You're making a pattern recognition of what your teacher does and what your mom does. Alrighty, so what are the concepts, the mechanisms behind this? There are two. Okay. Substitution and condensation. Substitution, it kind of, it's going to be what it sounds like. Substitution is when you take one idea, symbol, word, or anything, and replace it with another. So the example of replacing teacher with mom. Condensation. Condensation is whenever you take multiple things and you conglomerate it into one image or symbol or thing in your life. Taking many and turning it into one. So the example would be, imagine you have two jobs, right? And let's go back to our zombie example. You have two bosses, you have lots of people who might be kind of annoying to you, or you might complain about them a lot behind your back. Not everybody likes their boss. And so these zombies, they're chasing after you, and you're so afraid of them, or maybe you want to fight back and defend yourself. But it's odd that they're saying, go take your break, go take your break, go take your break, over and over. And that would be condensation. You're taking all of those people and you're putting it into this image of a zombie or something else. It doesn't have to be my examples. It could be whatever the interpretation is. And the next important concept developed by Sigmund Freud, which we're going to be using in this series, is the superego, the ego, and the id. These are sort of three parts of yourself. Can you see that? Not exactly. All right, the three parts of yourself. So what are these? The superego is a kind of rule maker, a lawmaker, and also an enforcer. It is the kind of dad figure, the father, and that's going to be important in just a second. I'll explain why, specifically the father. It's the person who tells you what is good. The id is diametrically opposed to the superego. It is the pleasure seeker. The transgressor of the boundaries set by the superego or the law. The little teenager within us who wants to rebel. And the ego is the sense of self. It's you. If you know, it is who I am to myself. So that's the one making the decisions here. And you can imagine it like a devil and angel on your shoulders. There's the devil, horns, and then the angel, happy, and then there's yourself, kind of man. And with this concept, you're able to interpret what parts of your dreams are these parts of yourself. Like the superego is the zombies in your dream telling you to take your break, and so on. So if you've ever seen Jekyll and Hyde, you can immediately put characters to these three parts. Jekyll and Hyde, if you know this story, Jekyll is a doctor who has been doing a little bit of mad science behind the scenes. And whenever he drinks this potion, he becomes Hyde. He is still physically Jekyll person, but he looks vastly different. And whenever he becomes Hyde, he's kind of mentally not okay. He goes around and he tramples over this young girl in an alley, and he kills all sorts of people. And he does sorts of terrible things. And Jekyll, in the public view, is, I don't know if I spelled that right. I might have spelled that wrong, guys. Jekyll is, that's what it is, the moral man. the man who everyone looks up to be able to learn a lesson about how to act, how to be good. He is sort of the role model. And there's also a version of Jekyll that, there we go, makes the decision to be either Jekyll or Hyde. So you should be able to map characters in different, you could do shows or books, even songs, to this concept here, this theory. And so why is the superego the father, right? Why is it so important? Well, you typically think of a father as someone in your life who makes the rules, stereotypically, right? In media and all sorts of stuff. But it's because of, let's see if I can spell this right, the Oedipus complex. You may have heard this before. It's also going to be very important for the rest of the series. But the Oedipus complex. The Oedipus is an ancient Greek myth of a prince or young man, sort of, who loves his mother very much. And he loves his mother to the point where he wants to have intercourse with his mother. He wants to have incest. But his father is married to his mother and has intercourse as much as he likes. So his father becomes a rival to his mother. And so Oedipus, the protagonist of our story, kills his father and marries his mother. And of course, this is just a myth. And I would say he did it so that we don't have to. You understand the meaning behind that in a later video of the lecture series, but this is just a myth. Not everybody wants to kill their father to marry their mother, obviously. But the lesson behind this is identifying with your desire. By identifying with your father. So Oedipus should learn to identify with his father. And one day he'll grow up and he'll say something boring like, one day I want to love a woman just like my father loved my mother. And that's the lesson of this story here. And it is just a story, but it'll be important in the terms of power later on. So what does all of this have to do with the main center of this lecture series, which is Lacanian psychoanalysis? Well, Lacan was a return to Freud, which is why he's so important here. Lacan took a look at the works of Freud and he revised them. He was a kind of critic, but not in the boring fashion, although many people say that Lacan is very boring. I would personally disagree, but he was a critic in the kind of fashion that Oscar Wilde had, if you do know Oscar Wilde. The critic as a creator. Criticism for Lacan and Wilde isn't something that just deconstructs things down and causes an existential dread, in the same way as building things up, you deconstruct. So you can use your criticism to improve the model and to find a better way of interpreting it and understanding it. And that's exactly what Lacan seeks to do with Freud's work. He does make some additions to that because he is a practicing psychoanalyst, and he wants to take his practice and give it to us to understand the psyche and analyze it. So that's pretty much it for the first lesson. And thank you for listening. If you have any comments or concerns, please put them down below. I'm going to try and get a larger marker next time so that you're able to read like all of the words on this board. And if not, I can just try to write them better because I can do better. But thank you for listening. Thank you for watching. And I'll see you next time.